Hi, my name is Pat Iyer, and I am with Annie Notestein, and we are here to talk about something that holds people back when they are taking risks, doing new things like starting businesses or expanding their client base or marketing in new ways. And that is looking at how your self-confidence impacts how comfortable you are with those activities as a legal nurse consultant. Annie is a certified integrative life coach, and she's the owner of a company called Inner Peace and Purpose. I really love that, Annie. That makes me feel serene just saying it. She specializes in working with people who want to quickly build their self-esteem and their confidence, and she excels in teaching people who are frustrated with doubting themselves and tired of negative self-talk. They beat themselves up so that the end result is that they don't feel worthy or confident. Annie has put together an Inner Peace, Your Peaceful Heart CD. The title is Your Peaceful Heart CD, that leads you step by step through how to connect with your wisdom and your compassion and help you stop beating yourself up. Annie, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Pat.
Let's dive into the topic. I've just mentioned in your introduction about negative self-talk. I sometimes catch myself doing it. Like I will say, that was really stupid, Pat. Let's talk about that phrase, that sentence that I just gave you, and how that ties with the inner critic or the negative self-talk concept.
I was talking to a woman one time, and she made it clear to me that, she made it clear to me later when I thought about it, but the inner critic to her is what is saying, you're really dumb. That was a dumb thing to do, versus the negative self-talk where you're saying, I was really dumb. And you might be saying that out loud or thinking that in your mind, that sort of thing.
You know, that reminds me of when we were parenting and we were told, criticize the action of the child, but not criticize the child himself. Is that what we are talking about in this realm of negative self-talk, that differentiation between the inner critic and negative self-talk, or is it something different?
Not really sure how to answer that. Let's see. Well, if you criticize the child, the inner critic will definitely, the inner critic is developed, grows when we're children, when we're young children. And so if you're criticizing the child, the inner critic actually has a secret job that most of us don't know about. It's to keep us safe and to keep our caregivers caring for us and not abandoning us. And so if a parent is criticizing the child, the inner critic will try to keep the child safe. For example, if the parent is telling them, you know, just be quiet, keep your mouth shut, that sort of thing, the child will learn how to, well, be quiet and not speak up. And the problem is we take those habits into adulthood with us. They keep us safe when we're children, but then they become a problem when we're adults and we keep doing them, which is what most of us do. We keep doing them.
Can you give us an example of what the inner critic might say?
The inner critic actually has all sorts of jobs based on what the parent wanted the child to do. So it can be not speaking up. We talked about that one. It can be people pleasing, trying to make other people happy. So that would be, for example, a oldest child perhaps has to take care of the other children because the parent isn't around much, or they're really critical, or maybe they even have an addiction. And so that child may grow up putting other people's needs before their own and not even knowing what it is they want because they're focused on making the parent happy and the other children happy. And that can also lead to having an inner taskmaster. I used to be like that. So, for example, after I moved one time, I had been cleaning the garage all day and I was going to quit. And my inner critic said to me, "You need to get more done." So fortunately, I knew what to say to it by then. But
yeah, and that's an interesting point because we can drive ourselves. We can give ourselves messages that result in unrealistic expectations about what we can accomplish. When we're working as nurses with attorneys, the stakes are very high. There's lots of money involved in litigation. There's a great emphasis on getting it done right the first time. One of those quality improvement principles, do it right for the first time so that you don't have rework and redoing. And as nurses, we are people pleasers. We do want people to be happy with what we can accomplish for them, the reports that we turn over to attorneys. We want them to be satisfied. And yet we can be off the mark. And that inner critic can then start screaming, why did you think that you could do this work? This is difficult, time-consuming work. There's not much leeway for making mistakes. Why did you think that you could take on this work? Could you comment from your perspective of being a self-confidence coach? What's the impact of that kind of a message?
It's pretty devastating. Yes, it will definitely hurt your self-esteem if your inner critic is telling you those nasty things.
So what do we do with that voice? How can we change that voice into something that is more positive or more nurturing?
Well, there's several steps, but the first one, of course, is becoming aware of what your inner critic is saying to you and what you're saying to yourself that's negative self-talk. One of the first things I do with clients is I have identified 11 types of inner critics. So there's a belittler, the one who has people playing small, so not speaking up when someone's criticizing you, not saying anything, and then what often happens is people beat themselves up later. I think for nurses, another one is judging, comparing yourself to other people is a big one for a lot of people. Comparing yourself badly is particularly painful. I was giving a workshop one time and this woman talked about how she had a new coworker, and some days she'd compare herself badly to this other person, and then some days she'd feel like she was better than the other woman. And that made her feel better, but the problem was really the same, that she was using a measuring stick of how she measured up against this other woman all the time. Then there's people pleasing, there's perfectionism. A lot of people beat themselves up for, well, in this case, if in your work, not doing the work that the attorney expects you to do. And that can often lead to, instead of asking them, what it is you could do to improve the work, just thinking you should be able to do it perfect right away, and then beating yourself up when you don't.
And that's a tricky one, Annie, because attorneys want you to turn in perfect work.
Mm-hmm.
And we strive to be completely accurate. If we misspell names, if we've got dates incorrect, if we've overlooked facts, that can throw off the validity of a report. If you're an expert witness and you've got mistakes in your report, you might have to answer to them in a deposition. I did expert witness work for 25 years, and I can remember on a couple of occasions, and I testified hundreds of times, but on a couple of occasions in depositions, I realized I had a typo in my report. And I was just praying that the attorney taking my deposition wouldn't notice it. It had escaped all of the proofreading steps, mine, plus I always had somebody else proofread my reports, and there it was, big as day. And I wanted that report to be perfect.
Right.
So what do you say to people who struggle with perfectionism?
Well, once again, notice what you're saying to yourself. Notice what your inner critic is saying to you. That's the first step. That situation is more tough. Other areas of your life, it's okay not to be perfect.
You mean nobody will care if my floors are dirty this week? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I know for a lot of women, looking perfect is very, very important. Okay, well, you had one typo. I guess it would depend on what the typo was, if it was the date or a dose of medication, perhaps. If it wasn't that important, I would listen into what I'm saying to myself, what my inner critic is saying, and try to be compassionate with myself. We all make mistakes. Even you did after, all that experience.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think that's a great point, to be compassionate with yourself, to say, despite all my efforts, that typo slipped through. That doesn't make me a bad person or a bad expert.
Right.
It means that I overlooked catching that error when I was proofreading the report. I have been in some situations with people who were so devastated. One in particular I can think of, who really got torn apart in a deposition, and it shattered her. She was driving home from the deposition in rush hour traffic outside Washington, D.C. Mm-hmm. It was dark. She was crying so hard that I told her, please pull over on the side of the road and stop driving. Just get on the shoulder. And I talked her down. And in the meantime, while I'm talking her down from her highly agitated state, the attorney is on the other line. And I said, look, I've got her on the phone. Let me call you back. He was calling to tell me how badly she did. She was calling me to tell me how badly she did. And the fact she never, ever, ever wanted to do an expert case again. She stands out in my mind because her reaction was so severe. She crumbled under pressure, and the attorney was disappointed. And she was so traumatized that she said, that's it. I'm not going to do another thing for this case. I have to get out of my role. And eventually she calmed down enough that she could get back on the highway. And then I called the attorney back, and he said, she's a nice lady, but she is not cut out for this work. Mm-hmm. Do you have any comments about that story that I've just shared with you?
Well, I would recommend her when she got home is to write in her journal again what she's telling herself, what her inner critic is saying, and to get that out, because if you don't get it out of your mind, like by writing it down, it'll just keep circling and circling around, and you can just beat yourself up for days, weeks, maybe months. And maybe she really wasn't suited, but to keep beating yourself up for not doing something as well as she had hoped she would it's not good to just keep beating yourself up like that. It doesn't do anybody any good.
Yes. And I didn't hear from her again to find out if this experience had a lasting impact on her self-esteem or self-confidence. I know that we got her out of the case. We didn't give her any more cases to work on. So we took care of the immediate problem. But I'm sure it gave her a significant dent in her self-confidence.
Yes.
Well, I know that you've done some coaching with people who've analyzed these types of issues. And I think I interrupted you. You were going through the 11 types of inner critics, and we stopped at the perfectionism one. Were there more that you wanted to share? Before we continue with the show, I'd like to share this special announcement with you. Hi, I'm Pat Iyer, and I'm here with Wendy Vacherbeck. Wendy, can you tell our viewer a little bit about your business, where you're located, and what types of cases you've been handling?
So thanks, Pat. I am in Portland, Oregon, and I am in year 11 of my business. And we take care of both civil and criminal defense. And I will say that during the midst of the really shutdown area of the pandemic, virtually all of our cases are criminal defense.
I know that it certainly changed the complexion of cases in courthouses, and the fact that courthouses were not open, and that it became harder for attorneys on the civil side to be able to manage their cases.
Right.
What I know about you, Wendy, is that you have, at a pretty early stage in your business, I've known you quite a few years, you came to the realization that many LNCs get belatedly, is that if you've got a system for making attorneys feel special and feel well cared for, they are more likely to return. And that seems like an obvious statement as I say it.
Right.
And yet you've got a process that I invited you to talk about at our domestic violence conference that's taking place on June 9th and 10th, 2022. Can you give our viewer just a little taste of the subject matter that you're planning to cover in your session?
Sure. One of them is that whole relationship building, because you can get an attorney client, but the whole thing is making them feel special and really working on the relationship building with them. So then when they get a case that involves medical records, there's no question in their mind that the first step to do is to contact you for help with how to make sense of what's in the medical records. So it's not only that relationship building, but it's also how to best do your work, whether it's written or in oral form. So then you will be able to keep that attorney client as well.
And we know that the airlines say, we appreciate you flying with us. We know you have other choices of airlines. And
Right.
we do know the attorneys can choose other LNCs to work with, and that hard-won client who is unhappy can walk down the hall, the proverbial hall, and find another person to assist them.
Right. And, I've had occasionally attorneys will email me or call me with a complaint or an issue. And I go out of my way to say, thank you so much for bringing this up, because that's a way for us to do better quality control and to really improve our workflow and the work that we provide. So nothing goes without a thank you, pretty much.
what are some of the things that people will be able to walk away from with after your session?
Well, one of them is the whole thing about working with public defenders and how to best work with the public defenders and to get access to them, and then understanding the whole issue of state authorizations. And then the other one is some of the things that I've learned along the way as far as working with the subcontractors, but also the logistical tips as far as really that relationship building and steps as far as when you bring an attorney on board. And then I'm one of these old school people that my marketing is not internet. It's US Postal Service, because if someone has something in their hand, I think that fires off different brain cells than simply reading it online.
And the US Postal Service appreciates you, Wendy.
Oh, yes, they do. Yes, they do.
I remember when I was doing bulk mailing way back when, I would walk in and the postmaster would say, "And Pat, how many times a year do you think you'll be doing this? And how many pieces in each mailing?" It seemed to help justify his existence in this little sleepy post office in my New Jersey rural area. Oh, a mailing. Here comes a mailing.
Yeah. And, you know, I've been doing return of investment, and it works out too, where it's sending handwritten cards and doing postcards. It's like people call me on the phone and say, "I just got this postcard. Here's a case for you."
And isn't that a wonderful thing when you hear those words?
Yeah. Yes.
Well, for you are seeing this video, you haven't signed up yet for our conference. It is covering the topic of domestic violence and specifically intimate partner violence. We are having 2 full days virtual, June 9th and 10th, 2022, with a group of speakers, including attorneys, legal nurse consultants, medical experts, a variety of people to prepare you for expanding a practice to include criminal cases. And if you have not yet put your toe in this water, to give you some tips on how you can best develop this as a practice. Thank you, Wendy, for sharing your perspective with us this afternoon.
Yeah, absolutely, Pat. Thank you so much. It's always a pleasure.
And you will see the link for the conference right below this video. It is lnc.tips/DV, standing for domestic violence. lnc.tips/DV. We'll see you there.
And also, you know, Pat, any presentation that you do, it's well worth the money. And you're not paying me to say that, but your stuff is always top notch.
Thank you, Wendy. I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. We will see you at our top-notch conference. Now let's return to the show.
Sure. Let's see. I was thinking of nurses in particular. There's other ones that probably don't suit them as much. Well, one could be the martyr, which also applies to starving artist or spiritual person, but martyr, so you're always measuring how much you're sacrificing compared to other people. And it shows how valuable you are as a person. Martyrs often believe that being paid well is not good. Money is bad, sign of evil. But I was thinking martyr, nurses work really, really hard. And so initially anyway, some of them may relate to measuring how much they're sacrificing compared to other people until they get burned out.
Yeah, that's a great point, Annie, because there was a time when I entered nursing the nursing profession where the martyr role was a very strong theme. You were discouraged from calling out if you were sick. You were encouraged to work 2 shifts in a row. You were encouraged to give up your family activities because if you didn't come to work, the patients would suffer. That was the martyr statement that was ingrained. And then subsequent generations of nurses said, I have call waiting on my phone. I know that this is the hospital calling to ask me to work an extra shift. I'm not answering that phone call.
Mhm.
I'm not giving up my free time. I'm concerned with myself and my family's needs. So the generational perspectives changed that reaction to being a martyr. And I'm not saying that the people who were caught up in the martyr viewpoint were necessarily doing anything incorrect. Their behavior was reinforced by everybody else. Oh, yes, I'm working so hard. Oh, yes, I worked 2 double shifts this week. But you said quite rightly, Annie, all of that leads to burnout and getting resentful. Martyrism can lead to a great deal of resentment, I think.
Yes, definitely. Let's see. Well, people pleaser, I mentioned that. So that shows up. People who are people pleasers, another name for them is too nice. So if someone's been called too nice, that might be them. So those people, and I'm a recovering people pleaser myself. Yeah, is you and nurses, I would think, would be very keen at knowing what it is other people need and maybe even what their mood is. But people pleasers often don't know what it is that they would like. And so they're focused outward on other people, but aren't good at tuning into themselves. Another one is perfectionist. I mentioned that, having very, very high standards and then beating yourself up when you don't meet them, and often trying to be perfect and trying to do perfect work or being perfect or look perfect is going to result in you beating yourself up because even you had that one mistake, even though you were so careful in your report. It's really not possible to be perfect all the time.
I think a perfectionist would argue with that statement, Annie.
I'm a recovering perfectionist myself. They would argue with me. Well, just look at how it's affecting you, I guess.
Yes, I know. I'm laughing also because I did a webinar a few months ago, and one of the people put in the chat that she was a recovering perfectionist, and she spelled the word perfectionist wrong. So she went back in and spelled the word correctly. And I said, yeah, let's talk about this recovering part of that statement. It's
That's
very
funny.
hard to turn off.
Yeah. Another one is overanalyzer. In one of our previous conversations, you talked about how nurses are trained to be very analytical and to look for what's going wrong and how they can fix it. But analyzing things all the time can leave out other parts of your decision-making abilities, which are checking in with your intuition, what feels right to you. Could be a gut feeling, could be an emotional feeling, and also listening into your heart. And the heart is a very good guide for what feels right to do. And if you're only that, so your mind is where the inner critic lives, where those critical, that negative self-talk lives, and the perfectionist and all these old habits that sabotage us live. And so if you're only in your head all the time analyzing everything, well, you're sabotaging yourself. You're leaving out the other parts of you that are very helpful for making decisions. Your intuition and listening into your heart. Does that make sense?
It does. Nurses talk about nursing intuition, I think in maybe a different context, but they are familiar with the term. They use it in the context of, something is not right. Annie doesn't look good. Her color is a little bit off. She's breathing differently. She seems to be trembling. She's moving her hands on her chest. I can't quite put my finger on what's wrong, but I'm going to insist that a physician come and look at her. That intuition recognizes the problem, can't completely label it, but knows that the correct action is to say, I don't care if you're sleeping. You need to come in here and look at this patient because something is not right. My instincts and my intuition tells me that something is occurring that requires medical attention. And then the physician who hears that message has to evaluate, is that coming from an inexperienced person? Or is that coming from a person who's got experience, who I need to listen to? Dare I not listen to that request and then deal with the consequences if I ignore the nurse? And then the nurse goes up the chain of command and says, all right, John's not coming in. Let me go to Marcia. She's the department chair, or Jason, who is the nursing supervisor, and get this patient the help that the patient needs. And when that doesn't happen in our world, Annie, and somebody ends up getting injured because that nurse's intuition is ignored, then that can turn into a lawsuit.
Right, because maybe that nurse wasn't that experienced. And so the doctor thought, well, I don't have a lot of time. I'll skip that patient.
Exactly. Were you finished with your forms of the inner critic? I don't know if I interrupted you again before the bottom of the list.
Well, there's the rescuer. I would think nurses could fall into that one. So knowing what's challenging for other people and helping them, and giving out lots of advice, but not wanting to receive advice yourself. Not wanting to accept help from other people, but being great at rescuing other people. And the other one is the inner taskmaster. So not letting yourself rest, but just thinking of having a big to-do list and then just always focusing on what you have to do next. And I've noticed that when I am working on a big project, that when I go to bed, I can't turn my mind off. It's like, okay, what do I have to do tomorrow? I'm making a list in my head. And so I would think nurses could really be prone to that inner. I've changed it to inner taskmaster to be more sensitive.
Do I get points if I have more than one of these?
Oh, I used to have most of them.
Oh, and then how did you get rid of them?
Well, this process I've developed, I did a lot of research on the inner critic, and I found out what worked for myself and people I've worked with, recognizing the inner critic, how it speaks. It also shows up in body sensations, and then learning how to be compassionate with yourself. And I teach people how to connect in with their heart, and that's actually really easy to do. So to develop that self-compassion.
I know that our listener is going to want to know more about that process and find out more about the services that you offer, the resources that you have for people who are facing these challenges that we've been outlining in this podcast. What would be the best way for them to connect with you?
I have several ways. The first way is I have a free self-assessment for people, and it's called Is Your Inner Critic Hurting Your Self-Esteem and Confidence? So it's really quick and easy to complete, and it will show you exactly where your inner critic and how it's impacting you. And it will help you decide where you want to focus to start taking your power back right away. So people can get it at my website, which is innerpeaceandpurpose.com, and then /gift. Do you want me to repeat that or not?
I'll put that in the link directly below this video, but I think for the people who are listening to this on audio, we should do that again.
Okay. It's innerpeaceandpurpose.com /gift.
Okay, perfect.
And then my CD, which I can show you the picture of. It's kind of, let's see, there we go. The title is Your Peaceful Heart. And I actually have a sample. I have another website to confuse you, but I have a sample on the website. You can play that. So my other website is innerpeaceandpurpose.com. So that's innerpeaceandpurpose.com. And then just click on the products tab at the top. I'm also on Facebook, and you can find me at the Inner Peace and Purpose on Facebook there.
All right, perfect. Any last minute tip that you would like to leave with our viewer?
Well, the path to, I think, the inner critic and negative self-talk, addressing that is really essential for building your self-esteem, feeling worthy of what it is you desire, and feeling confident. And then the path out of that is self-compassion.
And that sounds like excellent piece of advice that's probably more complex to implement than we can imagine.
It's
And
pretty easy. Well, I have a step-by-step plan, and it's pretty easy, but it really helps to know what to do step by step. Yeah.
Be sure to connect with Annie if you're looking for that pathway, for the guideposts on how to deal with some of these challenges that we've talked about in this podcast. Be gentle with yourself. I think that's one of the messages that comes out of this session, that it is easy to beat yourself up, but it doesn't serve any purpose. And if you learn how to manage your inner critic, of which we have many variations, we found out, and you can manage that negative self-talk, you can avoid getting caught up in that spiral of emotions that ultimately can rob you of your peace of mind and your self-confidence. And we are all after inner peace and purpose, as Annie has pointed out. Thank you, Annie, for being a guest on the show. I appreciate that.
Thank you so much, Pat.
And for you who's watching this program, be sure, if you're seeing it on YouTube, give us a like, a thumbs up, or a thumbs down. Leave a comment about the podcast, and be sure to catch the next show in our series. Thanks so much. This is Pat Iyer with Legal Nurse Podcast. I have just finished speaking with Kristen Steiner, who is a legal nurse consultant who started her business at pretty much the beginning of the pandemic, and will share with you some of the highlights of what we covered in her podcast. Be sure to listen to her show, particularly if you want some inspiration and you wonder, is this field for me? Will I be successful? Can I do it? What does it take to be successful? Kristen, what were some of the things that we covered?
So, well, like Pat said, I started in the beginning of the pandemic, 2019. Right when I was getting my business starting, then COVID happened. So what we talked about was, my clinical background. What made me want to become a legal nurse consultant? How did I find the information to become a legal nurse consultant? how did I get my first case, and what I'm doing now. And I think my podcast is great for any of you who are just starting out. I'm relatively new, so if you want any more information on how to start and how to get your first case.
Be sure to listen to Kristen Steiner's podcast. Thanks so much, and we'll see you
you.
on the other side.